David, as an unskilled dropout, you will not receive a bonus. You're going to get a transfer or a demo after this occurrence. You will no longer be employed by this department. I let out a heavy breath at Manager Richard for not owning up to his mistakes. I came to the realization that I had to part ways with this man. I'll resign then, I declared. With shocked looks on their faces, my subordinates turned to face me. To be honest, I've had enough. I might give Manager Richard a punch if I stayed any longer. I told Manager Richard, "Thank you for everything," and walked out of the business. I received a call on my cell phone from the corporation the day after I resigned. "Hey, what the hell did you do?" It was difficult to comprehend Manager Richard because of how loud and distorted his voice was. However, from what I could see, it proceeded like this. Manager Richard spoke with an employee when he arrived at work today. The value of the stocks is falling. There was a funeral-like feeling in the office, and upon further investigation, they discovered that social media was the source of the news about my resignation. They contacted me quickly for that reason. I work for the company as a 42-year-old employee named David Johnson. I work at a toy manufacturing, so I'm not like other employees here because I only have a middle school education. Not all of the nation's toy producers are well-known massive conglomerates. Confectionery toys, for instance, are produced by modest American toy producers. With roughly 50 workers, our business is a division of a well-known toy manufacturer. Our primary product line is baby toys. Being a subsidiary of a major company has the benefit of enabling them to place our products on store shelves. Even if buying things online is becoming more and more common, having them on store shelves still has a lot of benefits. But the epidemic that struck a few years ago significantly decreased the quantity of toys bought in stores. With the rise of online shopping, our company's sales fell off dramatically. We are a subsidiary of a major firm, but we would fail in the absence of sales. Our business was in such peril at this point that bankruptcy was just around the corner. It has been claimed that President Mike Smith even discussed the possibility of our company being taken over by the parent company. Our business was salvaged by an entirely new product. Our company abruptly changed its focus from providing toys for babies to adult board games. During the be-at-home phase, several board games saw an enormous increase in sales. The times called for board games. As a result, our business was able to restart operations after barely avoiding bankruptcy. Board games now account for the majority of sales for our company. About 90% of the games are board games, with the remaining 10% being other games. I worked in the development department till a few years ago, but I was moved to the public relations department last year. Mostly, I work to advertise our games by running pop-ups all around the country. Charles Miller, my subordinate, stated, "My brother asked if you could teach him some tips for the game." Charles was hired 3 years ago as a mid-career employee by our organization. He was a high-flying elite at a trading company before that, but he abruptly left and came to work with us. Those in his immediate vicinity seemed to oppose him strongly. How about you instruct him? You're also good at gaming, Charles. David, I can't match your abilities. The much-discussed new game will finally release next month. Though many of our staff are avid gamers, our company was founded on the production of toys for infants. President Smith wants to appoint workers who, at their core, are passionate about toys. On his days off, Charles is an avid gamer who can play for up to 24 hours at a time. He isn't married and doesn't have a girlfriend as a result, but he appears content enough. I enjoy playing video games as well. We've been chatting nonstop lately about the new game that comes out next month and that we both like. After 5 years, this is the first new release. I'm quite excited about it. Can I spend the night at your house the day of the release? My brother and I are going to play all night. Charles asked excitedly, and I gave him a hesitant smile and said, I'll think about it. Even though my wife is very game tolerant, I doubt it would make her happy if I invited a subordinate over for a late-night gaming session. Hey, stop chatting and get back to work. Richard Moore, the manager, yelled at us. Last week, Manager Richard arrived from the parent business. After the former manager retired, Manager Richard assumed the role. Staff members from the parent firm are frequently seconded to our organization. The former manager arrived on assignment as well and remained till retirement. It's likely that manager Richard will stay on till he retires as well. Sorry about that. We were checking things out last minute for the pop-up event that starts next week. Charles and me. We were conversing excessively while working, but we weren't lazily. Rather, we were making an effort to keep our voices down. You truly have a negative impact on everyone in your vicinity. This explains why ignorant idiots are such a problem. Manager Richard constantly criticizes me, as if he has it out for me. My middle school education is well known within this organization, but Manager Richard finds it hard to imagine someone with that background would work for a corporation. He never gets tired of making fun of me for it. I, not David, was the one who ruined the conversation. Furthermore, David is not a moron. He just completed middle school. For some reason, you guys always stand up for David. As my junior, you ought to be aware of your own value. Pick your allies carefully. Sighing, Manager Richard spoke as though offering guidance. When Manager Richard makes fun of me, Charles always stands up for me, but Management Richard gets tired of it. Manager Richard is a senior at the prestigious private university from which Charles graduated. Manager Richard believes his university is the greatest and is a fervent supporter of intellectual elitism. Charles's university is undoubtedly a top-notch private institution, but it lacks the prestige of public universities. However, Manager Richard overindulges in Charles since he is fond of his alma institution. David possesses far greater skill than I do. How come you're unable to see that? Richard, the manager, you have been brainwashed. How pathetic. Charles groaned, realizing there was nothing to disagree with, and became silent. I'm glad you understand, Richard said, returning to his desk after getting a satisfied nod, maybe misinterpreting Charles's silence for agreement. Charles gave the manager a glare and remarked, I really can't stand that guy. I tried to reassure him by saying, well, he's new here, and we went back to our job. Manager Richard and I never had a proper talk after that. One reason was that I didn't need to consult him, because I was the only one in charge of the pop-up project. In addition, Manager Richard had just begun, so he was unfamiliar with the tasks performed by the staff. Thus they were coming to me for clarification. I knew this infuriated Manager Richard, but he had to become used to the work gradually. Then it occurred one day. Hiring Manager Richard, I apologize. One of my subordinates, Robert Davis, had confused the deadline for promoting a new product that was scheduled to launch in 2 months. The client was furious and insisted on an instant apology from him and the department head. Although it was Robert's error, Manager Richard ought to have noticed it when he gave his approval. I couldn't verify it myself because it had to occur on my day off, of course. I would have examined it after my day off if it wasn't so necessary, but this needed to be done right away. Oh no, how did you think? This is a really important client. How could you thus enrage them? I'm sorry, but they said we need to explain. The client was right to be upset right away. We missed our deadline, and it cost them a lot of trouble. We had forgotten to conduct rigorous checks because this client had put all of their trust in us for years. Why must I go apologize? You go alone. That was an error on your part. But the client said to come with the manager to apologize. Robert was crying a little and in a panic. He was being yelled at by Boss Richard after receiving a phone reprimand from the client, and he was unsure of what to do. Manager Richard, I believe we ought to go apologize as a group. The customer demands a thorough explanation, and we must talk about what comes next. What makes me want to go? This endeavor has nothing to do with me. The main issue is that he believes he has nothing to do with it. He can't escape culpability because he gave it his approval. His ignorance of the project's specifics indicates that he gave his approval without conducting a thorough study. Given your scrutiny of other people's work, how come you overlooked mine? That seems peculiar, doesn't it? Were you aware that the deadline had passed and chose to overlook it? This is absurd. Manager Richard was going utterly bonkers and was speaking no sense at all. Naturally, I was unaware that the deadline had passed. The error maker, Robert, is no novice. He's managed a lot of initiatives previously. I didn't completely understand the project's details since I assumed a final check would be sufficient. Go. I'd rather not go get screamed at. Act like the boss and offer an apology. What are you talking about? Manager Richard was moaning like a child, and I sighed in frustration. It's only fair to apologize since we made the error, and in any case, he shares some of the blame for Robert's error as the department head. Simply go apologize. The customer is awaiting. I then pushed Robert and Manager Richard into a cab. Before we could begin making amends, they had to apologize. I then started quickly planning our next course of action. Robert and Manager Richard returned to the office almost 2 hours later. Manager Richard was in rage, his face a blazing crimson, and Robert appeared really fatigued. I was prepared for the impending reprimand when Boss Richard grinned and said, "I blamed everything on you." I was perplexed, not knowing what he was getting at. "What do you mean?" I told them you were entirely to blame. I clarified that you were in charge of the procedures and Robert was the point of contact. The client was perplexed, but also upset with you for assigning Robert the blame. Manager Richard laughed enthusiastically and appeared to be serious. Perplexed, I turned to face Robert, who was staring back at me with tears in his eyes. Manager Richard seems to be speaking the truth. Why would you tell such a lie? The customer was in rage. I assumed they wouldn't yell at me if I placed the responsibility on you. They didn't get upset with me at all, because they saw me as the poor man who had to accept responsibility for his subordinate's error. How credulous they are. My ears were unbelievable to me. How could he have thought of something so terrible? He didn't know why he had gone to apologize first. So what did the client say? Well, they were furious. Most likely, you'll be called in later. I advised the president that your error was causing a serious issue for the time being. This month's bonus is not coming your way, unskilled dropout. To be honest, I was no longer even surprised. I began to believe that the company was having issues because Manager Richard was handling the bonus evaluations. But that's not just right. David was not involved in this error. He did, of course. David could have prevented this if he had seen Robert's error. Charles lost all composure and yelled at Manager Richard, but he ignored him. "Charles, you think too highly of David. He's going to get demoted or transferred after this occurrence. He's going to leave this department. Get ready for the transfer of power." I let out a heavy breath at Manager Richard for not owning up to his mistakes. I came to the realization that I had to part ways with this man. Then I'll resign. All of my subordinates gave me astonished looks when I said that. Only Richard, the manager, chuckled and replied, "Oh, please do. Wait, David, please." But I'd had it. A terrified Charles remarked, "I might give Manager Richard a punch if I stayed any longer." I told Manager Richard, "Thank you for everything," and walked out of the business. I was doing nothing at home the following day. Although my wife and children were taken aback by my abrupt job resignation, they didn't get upset. "You must have felt terrible about quitting." My wife informed me, "You don't need to rush to find another job because I'm working too." She then instructed me to do the laundry, shopping, and cleaning before she left for work. At 33, I tied the knot with my spouse. We were married for less than 10 years ago, yet it seems like we've been together for a lot longer. I had spent the entire morning cleaning, doing laundry, and shopping. When I took a break to start making dinner, I couldn't help but worry about the company. I was constantly wondering how the projects I was in charge of were going, and if my staff members were having any problems. It wasn't because I detested my job, despite my decision to step down. I was unable to return to retrieve my possessions in part because I was unwilling to enter the firm. I would eventually end up assisting my subordinates with their work if I went back. That would negate the intent of the resignation. For what seemed like the 100th time today, I let out a sigh. My phone rang just as I was about to start preparing dinner. I took the phone, wondering whether something had happened at the company. "What on earth did you do?" As soon as I responded, I heard Manager Richard's irate voice, and I cringed. I did not want to hear his voice. "What topic are you discussing?" "Don't act foolish." It was difficult to comprehend what Manager Richard was saying since his voice was so loud that it was distorted. However, based on what I could gather, it went like this. Manager Richard had a talk with an employee when he got to work today. The value of the stocks is crashing. There was a funeral-like feeling in the office, and upon further investigation, they discovered that social media was the source of the news about my resignation. It was trending on social media and had even appeared in internet news. Why is there a stock market meltdown and such a commotion when it's just you quitting? You cunning bastard, you must have done something behind the scenes. I have no knowledge of it. Although I could understand what Manager Richard was saying, I was genuinely ignorant. My resignation had not been announced on social media. I had just informed my immediate relatives. I can only tell you that I don't know, regardless of what you say. It is useless to call me if you are trying to find the cause. So why? What caused the abrupt decline in stock prices? Everyone in the company is claiming that the stock is declining because I forced you to quit. The president is going to call me and chew me out if this keeps up. Although I could sympathize with Manager Richard's displeasure, I felt unable to address it. Even though I wasn't officially resigning and was still on paid leave, I had already made the decision to stop working for Manager Richard. Whatever you say, I'm not returning to the company. Although stock prices may decline, they will eventually climb once more. All you can do is put up with it. Even though I knew what I was saying was improper, I could not stop talking to Manager Richard. I grumbled and abruptly hung up the phone. I was aware of the challenging circumstances the company was facing, but there was little I could do to help. I didn't answer any of the calls from Manager Richard, who kept phoning. He called again several times the next day, but as long as I ignored him, he ultimately stopped. If my subordinates called me directly, I would be happy to take their calls, but Manager Richard was the only one who ever did. I went to the company a few days later to get my stuff sorted out. I thought about throwing everything away, but there were some things I wanted to get back, like an employee birthday card. I went into the office, a little anxious to face my coworkers after a long absence. Charles was the first to notice me. All I could do was smile awkwardly at Charles's sincere happiness. Manager Richard must have had a difficult few days if his calls were any guide. It's been a long time. How are you doing? I came to retrieve the belongings I had left behind. Oh, I see. Charles was obviously upset. He was probably expecting me to return. You left your desk just how it was. Simply take what you require, and I'll take care of the rest. His want for me to come back was evident in his remarks. I liked the work, of course, and I cared for my subordinates, but I just couldn't function under Manager Richard. Well, disregarding all of my calls if it's not David. How dare you look this way? As soon as he saw me, Manager Richard began to yell. The staff members were frustrated, and I had a great deal of empathy for them. I just came here to get my stuff. I'll head out immediately after. Hold on. The stock price continues to fall. Proceed to inform the president of the cause. Manager Richard snatched me by the collar as he bellowed. Why the stock prices were plunging was beyond me. Cease. All I'm doing is picking up my stuff from here. Why is it that I must speak with the president? I'm no longer involved with this company. You really need to change your attitude. Manager Richard hit me in the face, his pupils fully dilated. Because of his weight, his punch had more power. I had never been hit before, so I was completely surprised by the pain and shock. David, how are you doing? Well done. Go now and explain everything. I'll lose my job if you don't. What in the world is happening here? The commotion in the workplace was broken by a loud yell. I turned to face the voice and saw that the president was scowling at us. Greetings, President. I was on my way to visit you. Please hold on for a moment. Are you even aware of what you did? The president angrily yelled at Manager Richard, looking red-faced and panting for air. After returning from a business trip, I discover that David has quit. The stock price has crashed, and you have punched him. What on earth is happening? I didn't strike him. That is overly dramatic. That's not overstating the case. I got punched by him. David, how are you doing? And this resignation thing you're into? If something is wrong, we can fix it right away. There's not a problem. This dropout chose to give up on his own initiative. Panicked, Manager Richard murmured, trying to get past the president. The president gave Manager Richard a very irritated look. I'm conversing with David. You were expected to give an explanation for his resignation, but you failed to appear. It's because Manager Richard was no longer the confident man he once was. I informed the president all that Manager Richard had done to me, and I sighed. I clarified that I had been handling all of Manager Richard's tasks, and that he had been blaming me for his errors and threatening to withhold a bonus from me. After working for this company for so long, I have a lot of respect for it, but I can't work for a boss like him. The president gritted his teeth and stared at Manager Richard as I concluded my sentence. You've truly made a foolish decision, have you not? Manager Richard gave a little scream since the president was so angry. But all he is a dropout from high school. He is not the kind of person who belongs in our company. Charles and I, two outstanding recent college graduates, are needed. Manager Richard gestured to Charles, who averted his gaze out of distaste. It was obvious that Charles didn't want to be connected to Manager Richard. What the hell are you talking about? The president appeared truly perplexed. You believe that David's lack of a high school diploma makes him unfit for our company? Are you unaware that David played a key role in shaping this business into what it is today? Perplexed, the president turned to face the staff. Manager Richard looked to be trying to ask, "Is that true?" You don't really get it, Manager Richard. It's hilarious that while working for this company, you don't even know David's name. How in the hell? Is it really so significant that he dropped out? Manager Richard stomped like a child in frustration, because he really didn't understand. This company started making board games a few years ago. Creating our main board game was my idea. I saw that there was no future for the products and sales strategies we were using. I was appreciative that this company hired me even though I didn't have a high school degree. In contrast to those who felt that in a difficult situation, we should simply be taken over by the parent firm, I valued this business and wanted to keep its brand intact. David never gave up on the business, even if everyone else had. I was surprised when he suggested making board games, but I wanted to support his efforts, stated the president. We made the decision to develop a product that was entirely unrelated to the infant toys we had been producing. Unknown toys wouldn't sell, I knew that. I made the decision that I could increase its visibility on my own. I began uploading daily explanation videos of the board games I created to a streaming platform. Although there weren't many views at first, the channel eventually grew in subscribers, and our board game received more recognition. Our board game was even featured in a video by a well-known influencer, which greatly increased its appeal within the gaming community. David has a well-known channel. It's not just about breaking down board games. David's unparalleled abilities, plus the complexity of the games, make it immensely engaging. Charles remarked, laughing uncontrollably. David faced many intelligent influencer challenges, but none can defeat him. It's quite exciting to watch someone like David, a recent middle school graduate, upset opponents from esteemed universities. He went on. That type of channel is now what it is. The channel was originally intended to promote our board games, but it has since evolved into a venue for opponents to attempt to outsmart me. Thankfully, David has helped it gain a lot of popularity. Our business gained recognition as the manufacturer of board games. Following that, sales soared. The games sold well after people learned about them since they were clearly entertaining. Our stock prices shot up at that point. The president continued, nodding. Our board games that are offered in English were quite popular abroad. Our stock prices rose to levels never seen by an Earth corporation as a result. We now host international competitions for our board games. The winner gets to confront David, who never loses. As a prize, the president chuckled. I can't afford to lose at a game I developed, I replied. It resembles my kid. I felt invincible in this game because I had created it from the ground up with the strategy in mind. It's not surprising that the stock prices fell after David quit, because a lot of people bought our stock because he was with us. Manager Richard reportedly visited a client whose employee was the source of the information breach. At Charles's words, Manager Richard's face contorted into a strained, tearful smile. The client adores David as well. They were presumably incensed by the disparaging remarks made about him. It appears that a client firm employee shared information about it on social media, which sparked the rapid spread of suspicions. David's resignation was confirmed by one of our staff members. David, let me ask again, why are you leaving our company? The president was aware of the response. I looked at Manager Richard, who was a little unsteady. He was aware of my next words. I'm not interested in working with Manager Richard. I refuse to step down even if someone else replaces him. I see, the president said in comprehension. President Richard nodded satisfactorily, Manager Richard looking heartbroken. Thereupon, Manager Richard is dismissed with immediate effect. He will have to pay compensation and be held accountable for the financial damages brought on by the stock market meltdown. We will also sue for damages for the abuse you endured at his hands. David, can you visit a psychiatrist tomorrow and get a diagnosis? The somber tone of the president's speech made me chuckle out loud. He really was ruthless. David is essential to the business and to me. David cannot be replaced, but we can replace Manager Richard. I wholeheartedly concur. David's educational background is irrelevant in comparison. No one can outplay him in the games, no matter how intelligent. Charles sighed profoundly. While it's not ideal, it is true that everything may be measured by a game. A judgment based only on my educational background is overly generalized. Okay, let's announce to everyone that David is coming back to the organization. Could you please resume today, David? I replied, yes, I can, and took a seat at my desk. Everything was just the way I had left it, including the drawer and the top of the desk. Someone must have been cleaning it for me because there was no dust on it. Manager Richard stood dazedly where he was as the workers hurriedly went back to work. In a moment, he had lost everything, and nobody cared to sympathize with him. As the president had stated, Manager Richard was subsequently sacked from the organization right away. He was up against a big compensation claim. I honestly didn't care about my damages, but the president insisted, still agitated, take what you can get. All of that job was placed upon you to complete in Manager Richard's stead. I can only be content in this way. Appreciative of the help I had from others, I made the decision to seek a diagnosis and compensation. Knowing that there were those who were more enraged than I was about this circumstance was consoling. The president continued to search for further means of holding Manager Richard responsible. Rich, the debt manager, Richard, the manager, racked up enormous debt that he would never be able to pay off in his lifetime. Furthermore, the wife of Manager Richard filed for divorce right away. They were living apart in the same house, and their marriage had already become chilly. Without a doubt, this episode was the last straw. Manager Richard, who now lives alone in a dilapidated flat, lost everything in an instant. In an attempt to make ends meet, he works part-time jobs from dawn to night, but he has turned to loan sharks after falling behind on alimony and compensation payments. It's improbable that he will ever lead a regular life again because his life has been utterly shattered. Charles is staying at my house today. Charles insisted on staying over so they could play a newly released game. My wife Maria told me, it's been tough for you, and you need a break, but I feared she could be offended. It's okay since Charles is courteous. Charles cheerfully showed over with bags full of snacks and alcohol, to Maria's pleasure. We could engage in internet gaming. You know I'm traditional in that regard. I like to play while sharing a beer with you. Charles's expression was innocent as he fiddled with the controller. Anyway, David, I'm so happy you returned. Many workers were prepared to leave if you did. To be honest, Charles, I was one of them. You claimed to be my biggest fan when you joined the company, didn't you? Charles was one of the people who frequently left comments on my films, so I knew who he was when David first started working there. This passionate admirer astonished me by joining my business. David seems divine to me. I saw your movies, and they helped me get through a difficult period. It seems that Charles experienced some issues with his social networks while attending college. He frequently told me that my movies had been helpful to him at that time. He wasn't the only one watching who thought so. David, having the ability to change people's lives is a fantastic job. You're fantastic. As we conversed, it crossed my mind that I wanted to work at this position permanently. Nothing is more satisfying than realizing how your actions may empower other people.